Do you know him? He really is the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler, the man who ignited World War II. Around him were a group of men who helped him rise to power and held important positions during the Nazi rule. What is the story of each of them? How did their relationship with Hitler begin, and how did it end? We'll find out all of that in this video. After Hitler's victory in the Battle of France, he reached the pinnacle of his glory, where the Germans saw him as an inspiring leader. But what was the role of his inner circle? In reality, Hitler was surrounded by a group of men who competed with each other. The first was Hitler's right-hand man, Hermann Göring, a brilliant pilot who shot down many enemy planes in World War I, but he was a drug addict and loved a life of luxury. The second man after Hitler was Heinrich Himmler, the worst man in Hitler's circle. He was more Aryan than Hitler himself. He led the SS, which committed crimes against humanity, and came from a wealthy family. His father was a Latin teacher. Joseph Goebbels was also among the first rank in the dictator's entourage. He held a doctorate in literature from university, but he did not obtain the prestigious position he aspired to, so he was forced to accept a job as a bank clerk. He had a leg disability, which he claimed was due to an injury sustained in World War I. He was one of Hitler's most loyal men, and served as the Nazi Minister of Propaganda. The engineer Albert Speer joined Hitler's circle late. He was an ambitious engineer and is considered the architect of Hitler's glory, who would later become the Reich's Minister of Armaments, and a leading figure in Hitler's inner circle was Rudolf Hess, who was in charge of the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp, and lived with his family near the camp. Dr. Joseph Mengele was also among Hitler's inner circle, as he used prisoners at Auschwitz for inhumane experiments, particularly on children. However, there was one man in Hitler's entourage who wasn't in either the first or second tier, but rather a gifted field commander. Despite his young age, he earned numerous titles and decorations, eventually rising to the rank of Field Marshal in June 1942. This was Erwin Rommel, one of the best military commanders in German history, known for his powerful and surprising maneuvers. Rommel was born in Heidenheim, southern Germany, on November 15, 1891. He came from a middle-class family, and had a passion for engineering from a young age, but his grades prevented him from attending engineering school. He then joined the military academy and graduated as a lieutenant. He served in the infantry but later excelled in the armored corps. At the beginning of World War II, he was appointed commander of Hitler's personal guard. In 1941, Rommel was tasked with supporting Italian forces in North Africa, where he achieved his greatest and most powerful victories. However, he returned to Germany after withdrawing his army to Tunisia following the Battle of El Alamein, as he needed supplies and there was no air support. Going back to the beginning of the 20th century, Hitler was unknown to many and was trying to find his place among the elite in Munich. He gathered a select group of aides around him, and initially gave speeches at beer gatherings in Munich. His speeches were bold and influential, and this is how one of his strongest supporters, Hermann Göring, came to power. After Germany's defeat in World War I, its army was disbanded, and a large number of its officers were discharged, including the pilot Göring. However, he married a Swedish woman of noble birth. Hitler was still a member of the Socialist German Workers' Party, SDF, but Göring also joined, securing a prominent position. In November 1923, Hitler staged a coup in Munich with the help of armed men from his party and some of his elite supporters. A confrontation ensued between his group and security forces, resulting in the deaths of some of his followers and injuries to Hitler himself. Hitler was tried and imprisoned for 8 months, during which time he began writing his memoirs. Göring, having lost everything, fled to Sweden but returned after Hitler's release from prison. Instead of joining the armed groups, Göring entered the political arena. As Hitler had decided to pursue democracy after his release, Göring was an ideal candidate, and in 1928, he was elected to the German parliament as a representative of the Nazi Party. In 1900 and 1932, he became president of the Reichstag. As for Himmler, he became head of the SS. He was an agricultural engineer, so he bought a farm for himself and his family. He represented Hitler's extermination arm. His men were distinguished by their long black coats, and were staunch believers in the superiority of the Aryan race. Joseph Goebbels was also preparing a place for himself in the front ranks. He was loyal to the FHRER, who had given him everything after he had been nothing. His disability was a complex for him, which is why he failed to join the army, and also failed to become a writer. Without Hitler, he was nothing. Hitler sent him to Berlin to carry the banner of the Nazi Party there. Berlin was a stronghold of communism in Germany and one of the largest cities in Europe at the time. As soon as Goebbels arrived in Berlin, he set about establishing a newspaper and a radio station to be the voice of the party against communism. He was now the party's representative in Berlin, and he sent his men to clash with communists in their neighborhoods. Chaos ensued, and the police intervened, but that didn't matter to him. In 1930, a young man was killed by a communist, and Goebbels exploited this. The event ignited a fire, and Hitler himself attended the funeral. Once Hitler came to power, Göring had the lion's share, assuming numerous high-ranking positions, which caused resentment among the rest of the entourage. But he deserved it. He had managed to impose his authority. In February 1933, he set fire to the Reichstag and blamed it on the communists. A large number of them were arrested without trial. He also established the Gestapo, one of Hitler's powerful arms. Goebbels took charge of newspapers and books. In front of the University of Berlin, books by Jewish and communist authors were burned. Germany was now entirely Nazi-dominated. Goebbels intensified his anti-Semitism to please his leader, Hitler. He ordered a boycott of Jewish shops and businesses, and anti-Semitic messages were broadcast on the radio throughout Germany. He succeeded in portraying Hitler as an all-knowing leader to the German people, depicting him as the Messiah who had come to save Germany. On December 19, 1931, Goebbels married Magda, a divorced woman who had worked in the Nazi Party, and was a fervent believer in Hitler's ideology. Hitler himself witnessed the marriage. She bore him 6 children, who were exploited in Nazi propaganda. Goebbels used his family as propaganda material without any qualms. These 6 children would all die at their mother's hands after the FHRER's suicide. The young engineer, Speer, was very enthusiastic. He managed to secure a place in Hitler's inner circle, and became a close friend. His first test was the new Reich Chancellery building, which he had to complete within a year, a task he accomplished with the help of 8,000 workers. The work was carried out around the clock and was completed, resulting in a magnificent architectural masterpiece. The young engineer had fulfilled his promise. Hitler now knew he could rely on him. On the recommendation of Himmler and Göring, Hitler decided to eliminate the SA, led by Ernst Rhm. They were arrested and later eliminated in what became known as the Night of the Long Knives. On the night of June 30, 1934, the hero of this operation was Heinrich Himmler, who had been one of the strongest opponents of the SA. Now, the group he led was unrivaled. Although Hermann Göring was Hitler's right-hand man, he had opposed the decision to go to war and preferred more preparation, especially after the German army's resources had dwindled. The German army had managed to capture many European cities within 2 years, but despite successive victories, the strategic stockpile of equipment was running low. Although military production had doubled, it was not enough. Moreover, the elite forces of the German army had been decimated. On the Eastern Front, after the start of Operation Barbarossa, Massacres were carried out against Russian and Jewish prisoners in Ukraine. More than number missing were killed in these camps. Of 1 million people, the criminal Himmler personally oversaw this, unlike Hitler, who never visited a concentration camp in his life. In the infamous Auschwitz camp, his task was assigned to a man with a bloody history, who had previously been imprisoned for stabbing a communist to death. It seems Himmler carefully selected him. That man was Rudolf Hess. There, the prisoners were divided into 2 groups. The weakest were sent directly to the gas chambers, while the stronger were exploited on farms and in factories for hard labor. On the other hand, there was a criminal named Dr. Joseph Mengele, who was conducting forbidden experiments on children there, carefully selecting his victims. His research aimed to find a way to produce a pure Aryan race that could then be reproduced. However, he also conducted research to treat certain diseases and understand the nature of the human body, but not at the expense of humanity in any way. It was a major crime. Now it seems that Göring was right. The German army collapsed on the Eastern Front. The losses at Stalingrad were devastating. As soon as Speer became Minister of Armaments for the Reich, military production doubled. The Germans also succeeded in manufacturing the first ballistic missile, launching hundreds of missiles from the German coast towards Belgium and England in retaliation for Allied bombing raids on German cities, causing further destruction and loss of life. But the most important decision for the Minister of Armaments was to protect the war factories from bombing. So he decided to build factories underground, and he succeeded in this. But despite all this, the Eastern Front continued to collapse until the German 6th Army finally surrendered. Now, about 300,000 German soldiers were in the hands of the tyrant Joseph Stalin. The dictator needed to rally the people behind him once again. So then came the turn of the Nazi propaganda minister. In February 1943, Goebbels held a large rally attended by thousands of supporters, calling for total war and urging the German people to stand behind their leader. He made numerous visits to bombed German cities, and visited the families of victims and the dead, all of which helped to raise morale, albeit temporarily. Goebbels was back in the spotlight. However, the Germans made a catastrophic mistake, believing it to be their last hope, but it hastened the fall of the Reich. This operation was called Operation People's Storm, in which all Germans between the ages of 16 and 60 were conscripted. They were untrained and used weapons invented by the Germans to defend German cities after the enemy began advancing towards Berlin. These weapons were simple, but they proved their worth. However, disasters continued to unfold. The Allies were able to carry out a major landing operation on the French coast, and the Western Front began to collapse rapidly in what became known as the Normandy landings, at dawn on June 6, 1944. By the end of August of the same year, the Allies had liberated most of the territory of France since March 1944. In 1945, the bombardment of the Reich capital intensified, and the Russians were crushing the city in their advance. Therefore, the Führer remained in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. On April 20, 1945, the leader celebrated his last birthday with only a few of his companions. Despite numerous attempts to persuade him to leave Berlin for his headquarters in the Alps, he categorically refused and insisted on remaining in Berlin. On the night of April 29th, he married his mistress, Eva Braun. On April 30th, Hitler committed suicide along with his wife, leaving the leadership of the Reich to Goebbels, who also committed suicide the following day with his wife after they had disposed of their 6 children. Göring initially decided to flee, but in May 1945, he surrendered to the Allies. Following the FHRER's suicide, many German soldiers headed west to surrender to the Americans due to rumors of harsh treatment in Soviet captivity. Himmler escaped and hid among the German soldiers, but he was discovered and decided to commit suicide by taking cyanide. It seems he had been prepared for this, But before his suicide and discovery, he tried to gain the Allies' favor by liberating some camps and releasing some prisoners of war. However, all of this was in vain, and he realized that there was no option but death. Albert Speer was captured in northern Germany and brought to trial along with Göring and the rest of the Nazi leaders. Naumburg denied all charges and claimed that he did not know what was happening inside the concentration camps. In reality, Speer was a great deceiver, because he knew about all the Nazi crimes, despite his disapproval of everything Hitler was doing. Speer was a young and ambitious engineer. He was seduced by power. He was nothing and moved between German cities to earn the highest wages until he entered Hitler's circle and found an opportunity to fulfill his dreams and ambitions, as he became a close associate of the most powerful man in the world at that time. Therefore, he turned a blind eye to the Nazi crimes and became involved in that circle. Göring refused to acknowledge his crimes, as did the rest of Hitler's entourage. But the criminal Rudolf Hess, the commander of the Auschwitz camp, confessed to all his crimes and exposed Hitler's comrades. In the end, the court, which was made up of American, Russian, British, and French judges, issued its verdict on October 10, 1946, to execute Göring, Hess, and other Nazi leaders. But the ambitious engineer was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He escaped execution thanks to his cunning, and after his release, he became a global sensation as the only surviving member of Hitler's inner circle. He wrote his memoirs, which sold hundreds of thousands of copies, and was interviewed by the media as a witness to one of the darkest periods in modern history. As for Rudolf Hess, the commander of Auschwitz, he was executed in Poland near the Auschwitz camp, the scene of his crimes. Most of the others chose suicide with their families to avoid humiliation and prosecution. Only one of the few who managed to escape was Dr. Mengele, who reportedly received American guarantees of safe passage in exchange for handing over his research conducted at Auschwitz. He assumed a false identity and fled to South America, moving from country to country until he drowned in Brazil. Another man with a different end was General Rommel, who was implicated in the assassination attempt against Hitler, carried out by a group of officers opposed to Hitler at his headquarters in East Prussia in July 1944. In reality, there is no evidence. There is conclusive evidence proving Rommel's involvement, but it is certain that he was dissatisfied with Hitler's policies in the final period, and doubted his ability to win the war. He favored making peace with the Allies, but Hitler did not want this bombshell, the accusation of treason against the army's most powerful general, so he sent Rommel a choice: take poison and die with honor and a dignified funeral, or be arrested and face charges of high treason. Rommel chose the former, and no one knew about it, except his son and wife. The truth came to light after the fall of the Reich, when all traces of Nazism, even the remains of its leaders, were destroyed, and a new world began. But today, after the Russian attack on Ukraine, the Chinese dragon's threats to seize Taiwan, the skirmishes between India and Pakistan, and the conflicts in the Middle East, will the world witness another world war? How likely is it? But what is certain is that if it breaks out, there will be no winner, because there will be no world or life at all. The entire world will cease to exist.